This is Eritrea, this is Yemen, and right in the middle you have the Hanish Islands. Consisting of three major islands, Jabal Zuqar, Greater Hanish, and Little Hanish, alongside an array of smaller islands, islets, and partially submerged rocks, the roughly 34-mile-long archipelago is now mostly under the control of Yemen. This wasn't always the case, however, as the Hanish were sort of claimed by the Kingdom of Italy back in the late 1930s. I say sort of because it's not clear, in fact it's rather unlikely the international community considered the then still uninhabited islands a part of the Italian colony of Eritrea. Nevertheless, when that African country later gained independence in 1993, it laid claim to the Hanish. The only problem here was that a then recently united Yemen also claimed the islands as its own. While both sides initially agreed to resolve the territorial dispute through negotiations, this didn't exactly pan out, and Asmara decided to take them by force in 1995, kicking off the now largely forgotten Hanish Islands Conflict. Okay, so the Hanish consist of three major islands. But when including the more than 23 smaller islands, islets, and partially submerged rocks, the chain stretches from Abu Ali, about 18 miles off the Yemeni coast, to Little Hanish, 28 miles from the Eritrean coast. It's probably also worth mentioning the nearby Haykak and Muhabaka islands are not part of the Hanish, and Yemen sometimes does not consider Jabal Zuqar part of the group either. Anyway, the archipelago has a total area of about 73 square miles and strategically sits right in the middle of the Red Sea. This body of water accounts for an estimated 12% of global trade annually, worth more than $1 trillion. In 2023, ships traveling through the Red Sea carried nearly 9 million barrels of oil, somewhere between 4 to 8% of the world's liquefied natural gas and 30% of container traffic. So the Hanish Islands unquestionably have strategic value, lying at a critical choke point for global trade, not all that different from the Strait of Malacca. But what is the story behind Eritrea and Yemen's territorial dispute here? Well, some do claim the Tahirid Sultanate, which ruled over Yemen and much of southern Arabia, may have exercised some control over the islands in the Red Sea as far back as the 15th century. For a more definitive starting date, we can look to when the Ottoman Empire conquered Yemen and the coast of Eritrea in 1517. Following this, all islands in the central and lower Red Sea were recognized as Ottoman possessions. Eritrea argues that during this period of Ottoman rule, the Hanish Islands were administered from the port city of Massawa. Historical sources are frustratingly vague here, though, and it seems likely the islands were considered of minimal importance by Ottoman officials. Constantinople did, however, allow the French to build a series of lighthouses on the Zubair Islands, which in turn gave the British a reason to occupy them alongside the Hanish during World War I so as to maintain installations vital to the shipping lanes. In reality, London likely saw occupation as a means to forestall the Italians who, following a period of expansion after the purchase of Assab in 1869, established the colony of Eritrea on January 1, 1890. To protect their interests in the region, the British wanted to annex the islands. Failing this, they intended to pursue a policy of veiled annexation, which involved nominally awarding the islands to Arab rulers and then concluding a separate treaty to secure them. However, both aims were foiled by signing of the Treaty of Lausanne in 1923, which, among other things, saw Turkey renounce all rights and titles respecting territories outside the newly established republic's borders. Article 16 of the treaty left the future status of various Red Sea islands, including the Hanish, officially undecided. And, rather interestingly, the United Kingdom and Italy were barred from claiming these islands. The British, however, still remained custodians of the island's several lighthouses. A few years later, when negotiating with the Kingdom of Yemen, British officials made reference to the islands of Yemen, which, as per a separate dispatch from the Colonial Office, seemingly included the Hanish. That being said, a final version of the treaty concluded in 1934 made no reference to the island chain. Despite this, Imam Yahya Muhammad Hamid ad-Din, the ruler of Yemen, would note, "The fact there has been no discussion or reference in the treaty now concluded in regard to the well-known islands which were occupied in the Great War, and which have not been restored or handed over to Yemen, which is their original mother, will not invalidate or detract from our fundamental and natural proprietary rights over these islands. The indeterminate status of the islands was nonetheless again reconfirmed in the 1938 Anglo-Italian agreement regarding certain areas in the Middle East. Aside from both sides agreeing the Hanish did not belong to a newly unified kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Yemen, the 1938 agreement is important in that it allowed for Italian officials to be stationed on the islands to protect Eritrean fishermen. And then, on December 20th, the Italian Governor-General for East Africa issued a decree establishing the borders for some of the districts in the Eritrea Governorate, which stated the Hanish Islands continued to be a part of the Commissariat of Doncalia and Aswa. This didn't really matter though, because following Italy's defeat at the Battle of Keren in 1941, Eritrea and the Hanish Islands were placed under British military administration. In the absence of agreement amongst the Allies, British military administration continued following the conclusion of World War II until 1950, after which point Eritrea was federated with Ethiopia. In 1962, however, Emperor Haile Selassie I opted to forcibly annex the semi-autonomous region, thereafter making it a province of Ethiopia and officially kicking off the nearly 30-year-long Eritrean War of Independence. During this conflict, Eritrean rebels used Jabal Zuqar and other islands as a base to launch attacks on Ethiopia. While both Eritrea and Yemen acknowledge this fact, there is disagreement over exactly why the rebels were there. Asmara maintains that Eritrean forces were merely operating in what they considered Eritrean territory, while Sanaa says it allowed the rebels to use the islands. Either way, troops from the Yemen Arab Republic, aka North Yemen, later deployed to Jabal Zuqar and Greater Hanish in 1977, ostensibly to protect the Bab el-Mandeb Strait from Israel. However, Yemen's actions more likely appeared to have been an effort to gain advantage in the ongoing territorial dispute. But speaking of Israel, just before the start of the 1973 Arab-Israeli War, also commonly known as the Yom Kippur War, Egypt asked North Yemen and not Ethiopia for permission to use Greater Hanish. According to Yemen's submission to the Organization of African Unity, the precursor to the modern African Union, Cairo and Sanaa signed an agreement over use of Greater Hanish in May 1973. Egyptian naval forces then occupied the island alongside Perim Island, then under the control of the People's Democratic Republic of Yemen, aka South Yemen, that October in order to establish a blockade of the Red Sea during the conflict. Sanaa points to this as clear acknowledgement of Yemeni sovereignty over the Hanish Islands. In 1982, the island's disputed status was again highlighted when Eritrea, North Yemen, and South Yemen signed the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. Sanaa decided to use the occasion to make a declaration, asserting its national sovereignty over all the islands in the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean, which have been its dependency since the period when Yemen and the Arab countries were under Turkish administration. Addis Ababa retaliated, saying the declaration by the Yemen Arab Republic cannot in any way affect Ethiopia's sovereignty over all the islands in the Red Sea forming part of its national territory. Both statements did not specify any particular islands, but the Hanish clearly remained a contentious issue for both countries. It's probably also worth mentioning here that despite everything, the United Kingdom continued to maintain those previously mentioned lighthouses and still technically was the managing government of the Hanish, alongside other islands in the Red Sea. That is, until 1989 when this role was assumed by North Yemen, which just a year later unified with South Yemen, creating the Republic of Yemen. However, while it protested, Ethiopia was busy with the still then ongoing Eritrean War of Independence, which itself had now become part of a much broader civil war against the ruling military junta. By 1991, Eritrea achieved de facto independence and, following a referendum in late April 1993, became Africa's newest country. Initially, both countries appeared open to negotiation, and following 2 rounds of talks, Eritrea and Yemen agreed to resolve the ongoing territorial dispute over the Hanish Islands through further negotiations scheduled for February 1996. What's more, if this failed, both sides agreed to take the case to the International Court of Justice at The Hague. Ultimately, however, tourism would derail this apparent progress. Although mostly still uninhabited in 1995, aside from a handful of Yemeni fishermen, Sanaa permitted a German, other sources say Italian, company to build a hotel and scuba diving center on Greater Hanish. This alarmed Eritrea, which believed Yemen was attempting to establish facts on the ground before negotiations actually occurred. And this seemingly was confirmed when Yemen sent over a force of about 200 men to guard the construction site. Both sides met in Asmara that December but failed to resolve the dispute, with Eritrea claiming talks stalled when the Yemeni delegation insisted their mandate was to discuss Hanish Island and not the archipelago itself. Shortly thereafter, fighting broke out on December 15th. Eritrea used all seaworthy vessels it had, including local fishing boats and even an Egyptian ferry it commandeered. During the fighting, a passing Russian merchant ship was hit and damaged in mistake for a Yemeni naval vessel. Meanwhile, Yemen tried capturing Little Hanish, launching a series of air and ground attacks. Eritrean forces nonetheless remained in control of the island, reporting that 12 people were killed and nearly 200 Yemeni soldiers had been taken prisoner. 2 days later, on December 17th, both sides agreed to a ceasefire. Sanaa, however, quickly accused Asmara of violating this, claiming that Eritrean forces seized Greater Hanish on December 18th. Eritrea dismissed this, saying it had actually gained control of the island the previous day before the ceasefire came into effect. While the reasons for the conflict seem straightforward enough, some have put forward other theories behind Eritrea's actions. One theory claims that, during the Yemeni Civil War of 1994, North Yemen received military assistance via Eritrea, which in reality was acting as an intermediary in supplying equipment from Israel. According to this theory, the Eritreans decided to take the Hanish Islands when Sanaa failed to pay Asmara. Still, another theory claims Israel had a more direct hand in orchestrating the conflict, with a Yemeni official noting that Eritrea began reinforcing its military presence on Greater Hanish after a visit by the Eritrean president Isaias Afwerki to Israel at the beginning of February. This theory was widely reported as fact in Arab media, however both Eritrea and Israel denied any cooperation. Anyway, in the days that followed, Eritrea proposed a simultaneous withdrawal and submission of the dispute to the ICJ, while Yemen called for the return of POWs and Eritrean withdrawal before beginning negotiations on the status of the islands. Eritrea, however, rejected withdrawal of its forces as a precondition to negotiations. Taking role as mediator, Ethiopia stepped in, proposing a three-point agreement, which included return of POWs, mutual withdrawal overseen by a neutral third party, and submission to the ICJ. Eritrea returned the Yemeni prisoners it had captured, but Yemen rejected the simultaneous troop withdrawal. This was followed by another proposal which called for Eritrea to withdraw from Greater Hanish and Yemen to withdraw from Jabal Zuqar. The sticking point here was deciding which side should withdraw first and when. As no resolution could be reached through bilateral talks, the issue was ultimately placed in front of the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague. Despite the conflict having been a clear Eritrean military victory, the PCA determined that most of the archipelago rightfully belonged to Yemen, while Eritrea retained the right to fish in waters around the Hanish Islands and was given sovereignty over some islets and partially submerged rocks closer to the African coast. And thus, on November 1st, 1998, the Yemeni flag was raised on Greater Hanish, as troops from Sanaa took up positions on the island. At the same time, Eritrean troops departed on board a helicopter and naval vessel. The Hanish Islands would once again see intense fighting, however, during the 2015 Yemeni Civil War, when forces loyal to former President Ali Abdullah Saleh and Houthi insurgents on one side fought against forces loyal to acting President Abdurrahman Mansur Hadi, backed by the Gulf Arab Coalition forces, on the other.